Hi, I'm Trevor Magnuson, and in this extension to the full build series, I'm going to be looking at some of the steps from my subsequent build where I address problems that arose during the previous one. As usual, I'll be focusing on adjusting the process so that if I follow the new steps, those problems won't arise. I will also be focusing on actually following the steps that I've written down, rather than galloping forward to what my failing memory thinks needs to be done next. You may be familiar with my neck block and neck tongue assembly, where the tongue is glued into a channel in the heel on the neck, and then when fitting, slots into a corresponding channel in the neck block. That allows furniture bolts to extend through the tongue and engage in nuts which we've embedded in the rear of the tongue. It's glued inside the heel. That allows us to clamp the neck to the body while gluing up, and then we remove those bolts. While we're doing the fit up, we're going to need the tongue to slide up and down just a small amount to get it perfect. And for that we need to elongate these holes into slots. Now I made a bit of a mess of it last time. Not too bad, but just not as good as I'd liked. And so I said the way to improve that is by buying a smaller router bit. The problem with a smaller router bit is that the depth of cut isn't enough to cut through this thickness of wood. So plan B is to over drill these holes by 0.5 millimetre, 6.5 instead of 6, and then be extra careful positioning the fence on the router when we are elongating those holes into slots. Let's see how we go. I've been turning the blade this way and that to see how it is centred in the hole. I've double clamped my fence, so let's see if I can rig it so that when I switch on the router it doesn't yank the piece out of my hands. That worked really well in that there was absolutely no grab from the router. However, the slots now have a tiny little bump in the middle corresponding to the over diameter hole. I'm going to fix that by putting the original drill bit in the drill, not the 6.5, and just kind of running it along to even out the slot. You still have to look fairly carefully, and you can see it, but I think I'll then just kind of sand around the edges to give a little poor man's round over, and I think it'll look pretty good because you're only going to be able to see it from an angle inside the guitar through my offset sound hole. A little bit of sandpaper wound around a kebab stick is also working quite well. And of course there's always the option of putting a cover strip over the top if I or the customer doesn't like the look of them. Now we have height adjustment when fitting our neck before clamping and gluing, and when we remove the furniture bolts, tidy looking slots. A quick update: since I filmed that last segment, I realised that in Australia we have an unholy mixture of metric and imperial hardware. So by using a 1/4 inch drill bit, that's 6.3-ish millimetres, I was able to over drill those holes by a slightly smaller amount. leading to slots that are as close to perfect as I could really hope for. Wish I'd thought of it earlier. What you just saw was a reenactment. I have just drilled the 4 bolt holes in the corners of the access port cover. On previous builds, I've just taken my calipers and scribed some lines and punched a hole and then drilled it by hand. I wanted to make it a little bit more repeatable and dependable and not requiring of so much skill. So I made myself this little corner jig with the hole drilled in the precise location in the corner. Then I can just lay it over the cover, drill through the guide hole and get repeatable hole positions every time. When gluing the neck headstock scarf joint and clamping the 2 pieces together, because they are wedges, there is a tendency for them to slide apart. To arrest that, in my previous build, I drilled 2 little holes in the corner and put some screws in, just to stop them sliding. The problem with that is if you get it just the littlest bit out, there is some rotation of the headstock, which causes problems when routing my reinforcing spline channel. So I have built myself this jig, which has a base and 2 blocks perpendicular to the base that have a little bit of rotation in them under friction. The idea is that I put the 2 pieces in as so, get the blocks rotated correctly, then clamp the 2 pieces to those blocks, and then also clamp them to the base. This holds those 2 pieces perfectly in line and also prevents them from slipping when I clamp the 2 wedges of the scarf joint together. Let's give it a go. As always, it's a bit of a chaotic process. Let's see how collinear the 2 pieces are when this glue sets. Well, it's the next day, and using this aluminium bar as a reference, I can see that there's no gap there, no gap there, no gap there. Good. Likewise when I rock it the other way. When I turn it around, however, there's about 1/2 millimetre there and about 1/2 millimetre there. Now, how there can be a gap on one side but not the other kind of escapes me due to my understanding of geometry and the fact that these 2 pieces were cut from the same length of wood. But the most important thing is that this is a great step forward, a big improvement on my previous method, and that tiny gap is not going to cause any problem cutting the channel for the reinforcing spline or the channel for the truss rod. So this thing stays. In the recent build series, I glued the headstock veneer to the headstock before cutting a slot for the truss rod adjustment nut. Now, it wasn't a disaster, it was easily recovered from, but the point of having rules written down is that you follow them. So let's get it right this time. Right, now we can glue the headstock veneer to the headstock. All good.